we talked about the fact that, boy, if they all play to their ability and Wiggins comes into his own and you've got a team that seems to be out in the middle of nowhere in Minnesota, but they've got all this star power, they could be a force. We talked about it at the end of last year. Our team's afraid to play the Minnesota Timberwolves. It didn't pan out that way. Then you go into the offseason, then you go into this season, and it's clear that Jimmy Butler was frustrated with the way that things were going. We know that Tom Thibodeau is a sort of a dumpster fire in and of himself as far as the way he rubs guys. So I just think that became a hot mess really quickly. Jimmy Butler's a good player, though. So if you take the drama out of it, you add him to a Philly team, if he's having fun and they're winning ball games and he's getting along with Embiid and Simmons and the other players there, I think he's a fantastic piece for the Sixers. I don't have any issue with it. I'm with you. I didn't like losing Saric, but I'm also with you that, boy, is it nice to have Covington gone, because you don't have a guy sitting on the bench that you feel like, oh, we got to give him 4 or 5 or 6 minutes throughout the game, throughout the series, throughout the whatever. And you know that his plus minus is always going to be in the minus when he's out there on the court. Get rid of that. It's just dead weight. Now you don't have to deal with that. You've got a team, I feel like, that can do some damage. So yeah, I'm right there with you. If we get the Jimmy Butler that can give us 22-6-6 or 22-7-5, somewhere in that range, I love it.
Eric, speaking of locker room chemistry going the opposite way, let's talk about two teams right now in the West that are having some trouble. This next story was actually going to talk about Houston having a problem, but let's open it up with the troubles happening in Golden State right now. Monday night, Draymond Green and Kevin Durant had a verbal exchange on the bench. It basically led into the locker room after their overtime loss to the Clippers. It's been reported it was one of the most volatile disruptions in the locker room that this Golden State Warriors dynasty has had since this team started this run. On Tuesday, the Golden State Warriors announced that Draymond Green would be suspended for their Tuesday night game at home versus the Atlanta Hawks. Now, in fairness to this whole story, we've actually seen Draymond Green and Kevin Durant have some verbal exchanges on the court multiple times during the first 2 years of their tenure together. They've even talked openly about how they push each other. They're able to keep each other in check. But Eric, this felt like it went to another level when you have to suspend one of your star players for that. So is this dust up just something that's going to pass, or is this a lingering issue that's built off Kevin Durant's impending free agency and the fact that this may be the last year that this Warriors team, as constructed, is together?
You hit it right there. It's Kevin Durant's impending free agency. That is stressing the other players out, especially a player like Draymond Green, who, let's be honest, Draymond Green is a fun player to watch. If you're a fan of the Warriors, he's especially fun to watch. If you're a fan of other teams that he's gone against, he's sometimes especially annoying to watch. But you can't doubt his passion and his will to win. You're messing with his will to win when you have a cloud of doom hanging over the franchise, which is what happens with Kevin Durant later on? What happens with Klay Thompson later on? What happens with Draymond Green later on? Colin Cowherd was talking about it on his show recently that, look, maybe the issue here is actually not whether or not Kevin Durant leaves, but is it whether or not Kevin Durant stays? Because if he stays, Draymond Green is the fourth man out. He's the odd man out. If they can manage to keep Durant, Curry, and Thompson on this Warriors team, they could build a humongous dynasty in Golden State, and Draymond becomes the expendable piece. So I think it becomes an issue of fear. For a guy like Draymond, whose passion is to win, he knows that he's, I don't want to say tagged along, that is disrespectful to him because he's definitely played a big role in their championships, but he's been that third wheel, so to speak, coming along for the ride with these superstars, the guys who sell a lot of shoes, for these title runs. So I think there's a lot of fear there of the unknown, what happens. Now, I'm with you. I think in the NBA, you're going to have these scuffles and these dust-ups all the time. A lot of beat writers say, look, this kind of stuff happens in locker rooms pretty much every week. So it's much ado about nothing as far as that goes. When you have them yelling at each other on the sideline of the court, that gets a little bit messy. Then when you have dust-ups in the locker room and you have that being reported, that gets a little bit messy too. What Draymond was saying to Kevin Durant is the issue here, because that points to the bigger problem. Do these guys feel like Kevin Durant is going to collect a few titles and then hop over to play with his buddy LeBron in LA at the end of the day? Because to them, I think that's going to feel like he used them. He got them to what he wanted for his career, 2 or 3 titles, and then jumped ship rather than staying for the long term. When you hear a guy like Green making comments like that, to me, that's what becomes a bigger and more stressful issue than a couple of guys having a verbal spat, because that happens all the time in the NBA.
You hit it right there. That's the key and you always hear this even in a non-sports when there's an argument with someone or a disagreement, sometimes their true feelings really come out. And I think that's really what happened on Monday night. It wasn't just Kevin Durant. There was other players that were frustrated with how Draymond Green, who's typically not that way, grabbed the ball and tore down the court in a tied game with the clock running down in regulation and basically got the ball knocked out of his hands. He ends up rolling through the paint and the clock expires and the Warriors didn't even get a shot off. And Durant was standing right beside him when he got the rebound and he didn't even give him the ball and give him a look. I think it probably went down something like players questioning, do you care about winning this game? We had a chance to winning, and Draymond went right into the whole free agency side with Durant. And he was probably very vulgar in terms of his thoughts on it. And I think, look, Durant has said he wants to be open with this and he wants to be able to talk about it, but that might not be the best thing for this Warriors team when every time they go to a different arena, every time there's a media session, he's openly weighing his options and thinking about leaving, and everything that he does, he goes and sees their new arena, the Chase Center across the bay in San Francisco. And it's, is this going to be a recruiting pitch? Is this a reason for him to stay? That's what everything has come down to. And I think for guys like Draymond who are outspoken, they're sort of harboring this inside. This is sort of festering in him that every day Kevin Durant is openly talking about his thoughts on leaving this team. And I think that that's going to weigh on this team throughout the year. Draymond may feel the same way that other guys, and maybe Curry and Thompson, they're able to just sort of keep their feelings to themselves, and Draymond's not. But I think for it to go to this level where they can't just shake it off and they've had to actually suspend Draymond, I think it's the Warriors trying to show Durant a little extra love. And you sort of wonder, well, what's the impact going to be on Draymond? That the organization took it to this point where they would suspend him as one of their stars and a guy who is an upcoming free agent in 2020. Does he feel like that? Like, okay, well, the organization values Kevin Durant way more than they value me. They're willing to suspend me and take $120,000 out of my pocket for comments because everybody knows how sensitive Kevin Durant is. Even with his whole burner Twitter account, Kevin Durant has to hide his identity to defend himself against, who knows, a 10-year-old kid in the middle of the country or a robot from Russia. We don't even know who is at this point, but Durant gets so upset that he feels he needs to do that. Now you have one of his teammates openly questioning him, talking about this free agency and these decisions, and who only knows what else was said and brought up during that time for it to get to the point for suspension. So I tell you, I think for Golden State, Eric, this could be an issue that pops up more than just one time for this team throughout the year.
Yeah, Justin, I totally agree. This is going to pop up anytime it gets stressful throughout the year. Maybe they have a 2 or 3 game losing streak in the regular season, but then most definitely once you get to the playoffs, once you get to the end of the year where it's either title or you're going home and you have that cloud hanging over you, that's when things like this are going to pop out. And in the NBA playoffs, you got to have all of the guys, especially the front 5 that are on the court and doing the dirty work for you. They've all got to be on the same page or it's going to get messy. So I think this shows up and rears its ugly head more even later in the year as we get closer to that impending free agency.
Yeah, I think you're right. If this team hits a skid where they've lost a couple in a row, look out, because even going into Monday night, they were 11-2 at that point. So they've actually been winning and had this happen versus a Hawks team. It wasn't even like it was that stressful of a time for them where they'd been losing. And this came out after basically just one play on the court. So you worry about the dysfunction that could happen if they hit a losing streak like our next team, who's currently, as of Wednesday, sitting at 6-7. That's the Houston Rockets. They have made news because the players on Houston think Carmelo Anthony is done there. This is another story that you can put in the checkmark box that the Talkback podcast nailed early on in the summer. I remember talking about this back in July when my son was actually born, doing the show from a hospital that we were at, talking about the fact that the Rockets were after Carmelo Anthony. And Eric, we had a ton of questions then of why Houston would want to add a player like Carmelo to their team. He didn't seem like he fit in. Now it seems like he's gone. But Eric, this team now finds themselves in a hole, and a lot of that has to do with Carmelo Anthony, who's played particularly poor for this team in the 10 games he's actually played with them. So Eric, why did Houston think that Carmelo was going to put them any closer to beating the Golden State Warriors?
I don't know. I can't answer that question, Justin, because it feels like you and I know more about basketball than the Houston Rockets management does. And I know for sure the two of us, you do, know more than I do as far as that goes. But we said right along, he's an ISO shooter. And this whole team is ISO shooters, but Carmelo's a black hole. So what does he really add to this offense? I mean, basically nothing. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I'm going to let you move on in the show notes because, you know, Dominic Wilkins had a quote this week that really made the most sense, which is that Father Time waits for no one. I know that's not written by Dominic Wilkins, but he said it at an appropriate time related to this Carmelo Anthony thing. I think the Rockets picked him up because of the name on the back of his jersey. But that name, it really doesn't mean anything anymore. I mean, how many teams do you have to be on before people realize you've never added anything to a championship run for an NBA franchise? And now you've been in the league for as long as Dwayne Wade and LeBron James, and those two are still outplaying you, particularly LeBron James. You just don't add any value to anyone anymore. The way you play basketball isn't healthy for a team. It's a black hole. The ball gets passed there and it gets shot. That's all that happens. And when you are an inefficient shooter like Carmelo Anthony is, and you miss a lot of your shots, if you're not getting offensive rebounds, that means you're going to have a lot of one-shot possessions where then you're running back down the floor playing defense. It's a total disaster. It was never a good fit in Houston. I don't know why they did it other than the fact that, well, it says Anthony on the back of his jersey, but as his reps now look around the league for other teams, when is this going to end, Justin? I brought up Dominic Wilkins' mentioning of the cliche, Father Time waits for no one, because I think that's just it. Father Time has caught up to Carmelo Anthony, and he's not even the player that he was in Denver anymore, not even close. He's not even the player that he was with the Knicks. This guy is done. I don't think anyone really has any use for Carmelo Anthony in the NBA at this time.
Father Time has caught up with him. The changing landscape of the NBA has caught up with him as well. The fact that this game is so open, so free-flowing, a lot of threes and drives, and that just doesn't mesh with Carmelo's game, who wants to be more of a mid-range shooter. Now, he tried to shoot more threes in Houston. It just didn't work. He just wasn't a fit. He doesn't play defense. He doesn't do the things a guy like Trevor Ariza did that they let walk, where Ariza was a three-point threat and he could take on the best offensive player on the opposing team and give them problems. Now you lose that with Melo. In the minutes Melo played for this Houston team in his 10 games, they were a minus 63 during that time. And it really showed out when they went to Oklahoma City when he was 1 from 11 from the floor, 0 of 6 from 3 in an arena he spent a year in where he should be pretty comfortable in shooting the basketball as an opposing player. It was something on paper that it was just a name. This wasn't Melo from his 5th or 6th year. This is Melo in year 16. And we've seen that it just doesn't work for him. He might be a great locker room guy and he might say all the right things to the media, but he just doesn't fit in with this team. He's not a player that you can depend on to be a defensive force on your team or even give you mediocre effort. He is a below average defender. You're trying to shove him into a team that values three-point shooting and drives. And that's just not what Melo does. He likes to get into the ISO and pull up from mid-range, not get into the ISO like Harden or Chris Paul can, and either break guys down and get to the bucket and either get their own basket or create for a guy like Capella, or that can break guys down off the dribble and get a three open look. That's just not Carmelo's game. I don't know why Houston thought that would work. It just flat didn't work. And I hope there's been some reports from guys like Chris Sheridan that the Sixers were looking at Melo. I hope that those things are not true because I just don't see what he brings to a team. The Sixers have a veteran now in Jimmy Butler. They don't need it in Melo. I don't even understand the point of saying bring a guy like Melo in for veteran leadership or to help you get to the next level. He's never been to the next level. So how is he going to help you get there? So we'll see what happens with Carmelo. It sure looks like at this point that he is done in Houston. So we got one last NBA story before we talk a little NASCAR to end this episode. Last week, James Jones, yes, that James Jones for LeBron James fan that was his longtime teammate. James Jones actually now works in the front office for the Phoenix Suns. Well, the Phoenix Suns waived Tyson Chandler, and Tyson Chandler immediately signed with the big man needy LA Lakers, and he's already benefited by coming in